Owen, can you tell me a little bit about the overhaul of this network and why the NTA has decided to overhaul the whole bus network in Dublin at the moment?
Well, their rationale, what they say, is fairly straightforward, and it's hard to argue with. They say there's a crisis in public transport and on the buses. They say bus journey times are taking longer than they did a couple of years back. That there's a desperate need to improve the efficiency and the speed of buses, and nobody can argue with that. So there's no argument about the need for an overall, for a greater investment, for greater subsidy to Dublin Bus and to the bus network. The difficulty is that they pretend that the only problem with the network is the design of the network. And specifically the fact that you have all these routes numbers, one to the number 1, the number 5, the number 16, and that they're going to streamline it, make it simpler to understand, and improve the speed and the efficiency of the services. And in actual fact, when you look at the plan they have, beneath all the gloss and all the sort of the fancy footwork around it, it actually doesn't really deliver on that at all. I mean, the problem with the bus network isn't that the design is bad. It's not simply a design problem. It is the amount of buses that are there. It is the volume of buses. It is the fact that for the last 6-7 years, certainly since 2009, the overall number of buses on Dublin bus fleet has reduced. It was 1,200 in 2009. It's now about 1,000. So we have 200 less buses carrying roughly the same number of people. And obviously the recession is over. Investment in terms of buying new buses has increased a little bit, but nothing back to the 2009 standards. So the real crisis in it is the fact that the NTA themselves, who are unveiling this plan, haven't invested, and the government haven't invested in bus transport in the way they need to, and that's the source of the crisis. Redesign, there may be a role for redesign in some aspects of the network, but that's not the solution to it, because that's not really the source of the problem.
And can you just tell me a little bit about the subsidy by the government to public transport in Ireland, maybe comparing to other countries?
Yeah, well, there's a number of ways of measuring subsidy, but whatever way you measure it, Ireland comes out nearly lowest in any major European city, and this has been consistently the case since the 1980s. This isn't just a new thing. And even at the height of the boom, when there was significant resources going into it, it was still only playing catch up. So if you look at what's called a PSO levy in 2008, before the recession hit, it was in the region of 85 million. Last year it was 47 million. Now this is despite the recession supposedly ending. So there's been systemic underfunding of the network and of the public service aspect of the network. And part of the reason we have such a bad, I think, fairly poor public transport system is because of that underfunding over the years. So we have 200 less buses on the streets than we had in 2009. We're carrying roughly the same number of people that we did back in 2009. And we also have chronic traffic congestion because obviously more people are at work. And also I think the Lewis Cross City has made a big impact on buses. And as a direct result of the Lewis Cross City, a large number of routes have been diverted around the College Green area, and that's added to the journey times. So all these things are actually, you can trace all these things back to the NTA. It's decisions that the NTA have made and various governments to cut the subsidy, to cut the number of buses. We had 193 bus routes in 2009, we've about 111 now. All these things are directly caused by the NTA. So it's slightly ironic that the NTA is now proposing this as the radical new plan to save public transport, when they are the people that are directly behind the rundown of the public transport system.
And for a lot of people might not know what the NTA is and who they are, so could you tell me a little bit about the NTA?
Well, they're about 10 years running now, and they're a hugely powerful authority, the National Transport Authority. They control all forms of national transport in terms of taxis, rail, Lewis and bus. They're basically a quango. I mean, I like to liken them to the HSE. They're the transport version of HSE. And what they allow, in this case the Minister Ross say, or what they allow any government minister to do, is say, oh, it's nothing to do with us, the NTA are the authority to decide these things. So when they cut funding, when they cut subsidy, when they decide, as the NTA have decided, to hand over 10% of routes to a private for-profit operation called Go Ahead from Britain, when they do all these things, the government can say, well, that's the NTA's decision, it's not ours. But the NTA take the decisions from government policy. Originally they were set up in 2009 by the Fianna Fáil government at the time, with a clear remit to privatise and to bring in competitive tendering and to tender out routes to private operators. And that was the goal. And they are very, very ideologically driven. If you look at the board of the NTA, you won't find any enthusiasts for public transport. You won't find people who have a love of public transport or who are concerned about climate or the environment. What you find are, bizarrely, a lot of barristers and a lot of people who are politically appointed. They're all politically appointed. They're all sort of deeply embedded in the whole neoliberal way of thinking. And their main emphasis is competitive tendering, privatisation. Now, they do make some noises about how important public transport is, but their main goal over the last number of years has been to privatise. So a lot of us are very sceptical about what really lies behind this plan and what the end goal of this plan is.
And there's already been resistance in local communities to the new Bus Connects plan. How do you think this plan mainly affects people, and obviously I'm not talking about details here because it's very different in different areas, but do you think there's any people in particular who are being affected by this plan?
Well, the guy who did the plan is a guy called Jared Walker, and he's quite clear that there are winners and losers in any of these redesigns. And this is not a radical plan. This is really about a redistribution of existing resources. You're not going to have a massive increase in the bus fleet. He's talking about a 10% increase in bus fleet, which wouldn't even bring you back up to 2009 levels. So you're not looking at a radical plan in any shape or form. You're not even looking at any radical sort of talk about transfer tickets. We had that 15 years ago. That was scrapped by the government at the time. So none of the proposals in it are really that radical. They're sort of common sense ones, the ones that you could agree with. Orbital routes have been something that bus workers and trade unions have lobbied for years. We should have more orbital routes around the city. We obviously agree with those aspects of the plan. But as I said, it's not a radical plan in any meaningful sense. It's simply redistributing some resources and some buses onto what they call spines. And in fact, if you look at the claims they make for the spines, by and large, they say that there'll be a bus every 5 to 10 minutes. In fact, in most of those corridors, there's already a bus every 5 to 10 minutes, So they're not really improving or dramatically improving the efficiency or the speed of those buses. What seems to be behind this, though, is I think, an attempt to sort of create an atmosphere whereby you can tender these routes out at some stage in the future, especially the private operators. How it will affect Pacific communities, and people need to look at the plan specifically, but it's quite telling that in a number of routes that we've looked at already, they're taking routes out of estates. And the logic behind that is that it'd be more efficient if you have it on the main road. But it's more efficient for the provider of the form of transport. Obviously, it's cheaper. It's less fuel. It may take less time to do the journey. But if you're in a wheelchair, if you have young children, if you're dependent on your bus, if you've moved into the area because there's a bus directly there that leaves you home, then it's not more efficient for you. And Walker and the NTA are trying to present this as a winners and losers. That a lot more people will gain from it. And the obvious question is, why do people have to lose out? Why does anybody have to lose out? If you're really talking about a radical transport system to get people out of cars, why would you take buses out of estates? There are several estates that we've identified where not just older people, but everybody will have to walk 10 to 15 minutes to get to the main service, which is promised every 5 or 10 minutes. As I said, I'm a bit sceptical about just how brilliant that service would be. But nevertheless, the question is, why does it have to be losers? We need a hell of a lot more buses. We need a radical overhaul of the fleet as it is, and a lot more buses in the system. So therefore, I think Walker's argument that there has to be losers, and the losers he identifies quite clearly are people with disabilities, people with mobility problems, doesn't hold up. To me, that's something else behind that, which isn't really explained by the rhetoric that Walker, Jared Walker, or the NTA come out with.
And would you have any advice for people who are worried about the plan or aren't really understanding what the changes are going to mean for them? What would you suggest that they do?
Well, look at the plan first of all. I mean, one of the things I find ironic is that the NTA say, well, the existing system is too complicated, so we made it much simpler. We've removed all the numbers and we've lettered them from A to G. And in fact, I think for a lot of people looking at the new plan, it's just as confusing as any of the existing ones. But they should look carefully at it, and they should look carefully at where services are being withdrawn, because a large parts of the city, direct services into the city are withdrawn. And the justification again is that we're withdrawing infrequent services direct to the city and giving you a more frequent service which will link you to somewhere else where you can get a faster bus. But often actually what they do, if you look at it in detail, is they remove infrequent direct services and replace them with infrequent indirect services. So there's no real overall gain. So look closely at the plan, look at where your services are being withdrawn completely, and fight it, because I mean this thing is only a plan. It hasn't come in yet. There are local elections next year, there are general elections. Where the service is being withdrawn, people have to ask the question and should demand that the service is reinstated. There's absolutely no logic if you're trying to get people out of cars in removing services and saying, well, if you walk 10 to 15 minutes, you'll get a great bus service. The capacity issue is going to really hit people very hard, because even if these things turn out as Walker and the Bus Connect scheme says, they simply haven't got the capacity. Not with the fleet number they're talking about. I mean, they're talking about maybe up around the 2009 figures. We already have people being left behind day in, day out on bus routes. So, increasing it, if you don't increase it radically and increase the frequency and the volume of buses, you're not going to make a huge difference to it. You're simply going to increase the misery of a lot of people.